Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining me today in this webinar, or podcast, I should say. I'm sorry. What is the truth about animal protein? Do we need meat? This is the question we have today. And just like whenever I'm asked the same question about dairy or wheat, or really almost any substance, including coffee, my answer will always be the same. According to Ayurveda, it depends. So, what are the factors that determine whether we are a candidate for having more animal protein as our source of protein? Then is what we're going to cover today, the different factors that determine whether you or your family member should be having animal protein or plant-based protein. We'll cover signs of low protein, which does exist to some degree for those people who are not having enough protein. And we're going to talk about alternative sources of animal protein and in understanding how to be a vegetarian properly without having protein deficiency. So let's first talk about what we're, discussing here, and that's the difference between animal protein made of not just meat, but poultry, fish, eggs, cheese, dairy, and all the dairy products, compared to plant-based protein, which would be based on nuts and mostly legumes. So I guess dairy is kind of in the middle there. We have plant meat and chicken and fish on one side, dairy kind of in the middle, and then we have animal protein. And nuts, really aren't a sufficient source of protein. I mean, they're helpful, but really, if a person's going to be vegetarian, as per all of the billions of vegetarians in this world, you would need to eat legumes every day. Well, we look at southern India, where we have the largest population of vegetarians. As much as 300 million Indians are vegetarian in India, particularly in the south, and they survive off of legumes, mostly, they call dals, mung dal, masur dal, like red lentils, and other types of legumes. And of course, South America as well, mostly living off of or getting their main source of protein from legumes, pinto bean, black bean. We even can see Asian cultures getting a large percent of their protein from soy. So these are the main sources of animal protein. I know that people, believe that they can get enough protein from eating plants, like the gorilla, but the gorilla does eat constantly all day long and has a digestive system that can eat mass amounts of greens to get that protein. But that wouldn't be really feasible for a human. We don't have that type of digestion system, and it's just not a good source of protein to rely only on mass amounts of greens. That's why we can see people who have tried to live off of smoothies with vegetables often have signs and symptoms of protein deficiency due to that effort to try to get all of their protein from greens. Now, the real third source of protein besides animal protein, vegetable protein, is the dairy. And back to the Indians who are vegetarian, traditionally, a big portion of Indians are vegetarian. And of course, many poor people around the world live more of a vegetarian life due to inability to get the meat or poultry or chicken, or only having this chicken on certain holidays and festive days, and the rest of the year having legumes as their main source of protein. But all of these cultures who are vegetarian, including southern India, they rely on dairy as their secondary source of protein. So they have the legumes and the beans, and then they also have the paneer, the cheeses, the yogurt, and the milk. And those are great secondary sources of protein. Now, the only society we find in the world that's doing only plant-based and with no uh, dairy is in this tribe in Southern California. They call them the vegans. So the vegan, he's not doing any dairy. There's no real other society or culture in the world that is a vegetarian society without dairy. And it's very difficult to get sufficient protein and nutrients. And, if we want to start breaking it down, to like vitamin D, for example, and zinc from just plants. So we see protein deficiency in this type of person. Not to say it can't be done, but usually requires more supplementation, which is why the protein powders are so popular with these people. Nobody should really need protein powder because it's very hard to have a protein deficiency if you're eating protein every day. Even just beans, even if you're having like Indian, you're having dal 2 or 3 times a day, you would never have a protein deficiency. And there's no, particularly if you're having some dairy as well on top of that dal. But when you're not having the legumes, which is really what you should be having if you want to be a vegetarian, and I will say I was a vegetarian for probably the majority of my life, more than 30 years, and it's sometimes quite strict, but I was having my beans and my rice every day and sticking to that. And of course, I stayed for long periods in India where I only eat vegetarian in India because there's so much availability of so many good legume dishes, and it's very easy to be a vegetarian in India when everywhere you can see veg and non-veg restaurants. So you have the choice really every single night when you go out, and there's plenty of wonderful dishes made from lentils and dal that you'll never be bored, and you get plenty of protein. And then there's always some paneer and some cheese and some yogurt that's added, and of course some amount of nuts are also used. So that combination seems to be efficient enough to be quite healthy. If you're the type that wants to avoid animal protein through for moral reasons, for example, then you still have the legumes, the cheese, the dairy. Now, I don't advise to try to be a vegetarian and leave out the dairy. I think that is very difficult, particularly for a child. Even, in India, they do, of course, these 300 million Indians do raise children vegetarian, but again, not vegan. Nobody's raising a child vegan. I would never do that. And there have been cases in the United States where parents have been found to have been raising children on too strict of a diet, and we saw stunned growth and severe deficiencies. So, and of course, the whole subject of whether we should eat animal protein or not on a moral basis is a secondary question. We're talking about from a health basis. But let me go on and talk about the factors to determine whether you should be eating animal protein or not. I believe everybody should be having some amount of dairy. So we'll just talk about the meat, the fish, and the poultry. So here's the factors. First, your body type. As per Ayurveda, there's 3 types: Vata, Pitta, Kapha. And the Kapha type of person, and of course in Ayurveda, each of these 3 types will have different recommendations for their source of protein. With a Kapha type person, heavy, round, easy to gain weight, slower metabolism, they recommend almost a vegetarian diet. Almost, for you vegans, almost a vegan diet, but not strict. Still could have a little white meat, maybe a little shrimp. They're very light. Some light fish, and small amounts of dairy. So that would be for the Kapha type person who gains weight easy. Then we go on the other side. We look at the Vata, the thin, light, cold, dry person. In Ayurveda, they don't recommend this type of body is a vegetarian. They should have more animal protein because they have a tendency to be thin. And we can see many thin vata types, at least for my patients, already tried the vegetarian diet, or even worse, they went vegan, and all their health conditions got worse. Their insomnia got worse, their sleep got worse, they started having degenerative bones, their hair started falling out, and it really exasperated their health. So if you're a vata body type, thin, light, cold, dry, very active person with a high metabolism, you're going to be doing better with dark chicken meat, particularly if you have dry skin. You don't want to have too much white chicken meat, and oily fish like salmon, and less beans, because beans are very drying, and it's better for a person who's overweight and has oily skin, not a person who's thin and dry, to have a lot of beans. And of course, this vata type will get a lot of gas and bloating from beans anyway, so often it's not really that compatible with them. Now, if we look at red meats like lamb and beef, then these are only really recommended for being somebody who's anemic, a woman who's menstruating a lot, or somebody with a condition like ulcerative colitis where they're losing blood, and then meat soup is used as medicine, particularly for extremely anemic women. So red meat could be used as poison, as medicine, and it also could be poison for many people. The third type, pitta type of person, pitta prakriti, warm, athletic, aggressive, they do very well on animal protein too, but not the red meat. It's not recommended for pitta type to have red meat like lamb and beef, and stick with the leaner meats, because they're kind of in between the two. The kapha's heavy and overweight, the vata's thin, and the pitta's more muscular in the middle. So it's recommended they're kind of in the middle. They do have very good digestion, pitta type, so they don't have the gas and bloating, and they're not too thin, so they do good on some legumes and some animal protein, particularly dairy does very well. Like the vata type person can have a lot of trouble digesting milk, and does okay with like ghee and a little yogurt. But the pitta type person does very well in digesting raw milk, which my mother just conferred with me when I was a child in the 60s. She was giving me raw milk. And I give raw milk to my kittens, puppies, dogs, and of course children, because it's such a building substance. But even the pitta type, they do very good with a lot of dairy as a secondary source of milk. So just to conclude, I would recommend nobody become no dairy, no meat, except the very overweight kapha person basically could be no dairy and no animal protein and all. But even that, he should be not too strict and not too rigid, and listen to the body. And of course, once you've lost this 30, 40, 50 pounds of weight, would allow you to start to have some dairy back. And we know from social media, there's people who went completely dairy and animal protein free and lost 50, 60 pounds. Okay. There's probably safer other ways to lose weight. I do it with clients without having to be so extreme. But once they've lost the weight, they shouldn't continue with that depleting diet, because so if you're really obese and you want to make a big change quick, sure, go for it. But once you lose that 50 pounds, 60 pounds, I've had clients lose up to 100 pounds. And when you're that overweight, I do say no dairy, maybe a little ghee just for flavor, and no animal protein. It's all beans and legumes as your source of protein. But once that weight's gone, I let them relax and start having some eggs, little cheese, and some white fish or white meat every once in a while, so they don't continue to deplete themselves. So what are some of the other factors? Well, in Ayurveda, it's all very clear, but we could look at other factors like weight, which I talked about. Obviously, an overweight person needs less protein than an underweight person. Age, if you're a young child and you're growing, you have to remember that high protein diet is to grow and to become grow muscles, grow bones. Even your blood has protein in it. So every cell in your body requires protein to grow. So when you're a child, you're just growing every day. So this is why children really crave the burgers and the cheese and the milk and all these things, because they need it. And of course, protein helps build muscle. So our muscle building type of person, they love a lot of protein. But when you're older and you're not working out hard in the gym, just trying to turn all this protein into muscle, you're just going to become bigger and bigger. And excess protein can result in tumors, cysts, fibroids, and it's not good. Basically, things growing inside your body because of excess protein. And of course, this high protein diet, as we can see from people who have done a lot of high protein diets where they're eating eggs and meat and protein powder all together, they often have, high symptoms if they're not getting tumors and lumps in the body or cancer from that high protein diet. At least, again, it may have some gout, which from the high uric acid. And then, of course, I get many cases of people who are professional weightlifters and bodybuilders with kidney failure, also due to the high protein diet. So you don't want to go high protein, but you really have to be extreme to go high protein. Signs of low protein is receding gums. You can look at your gums. Your gums are basically muscles holding your teeth in place. So if they're shrinking down and you're just living off of smoothies and coffee, that's not a good sign. And we do get some of these wonderful people from this vegan tribe as patients sometimes. And usually it's women coming with their hair falling out. That's their main issue. Other signs of, but you look at the gums, I ask them to pull down their lips so I can see their gums. We can see the receding gums in a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old. Muscles are weak and small. Often, if they're on their own, they've realized they've got some vitamin D deficiencies. Elderly people on the too restrictive of a protein diet can break bones easily, have fractures, and people on a low protein diet, too low, can also have fatigue and even dry skin because all this protein, animal protein, has fat in it. So I would say the dry skin is not so much from low protein as much as not enough fat that comes in animal protein. But other factors we should consider besides just dosha, weight, age, also the climate. In a colder climate, you're going to be more inclined to eat more animal protein to keep the body warm. So that's why we see in this more tropical, mild climates of Hawaii and California, where it's easier to just go, let's go live off of plants and fish or plants and beans and live this kind of low protein diet, particularly if you're not exerting yourself much, like in India, all the sadhu and the saints, they're all vegetarian because they're not overworking, they're meditating, and they don't want the disturbing energy coming from the animal protein into their state of being to disrupt their meditation. But they're not, doing manual labor. So even your profession would depend on that. We know in Ayurveda that eating a lot of red meat like lamb and beef increases pitta, and pitta is increased and creates aggression and irritability. So you see people whose jobs are like military people, police officers who are facing the public, where they're having to somewhat deal with other aggressive people or be aggressive themselves. They all like to eat meat because it's part of their profession to be, big, muscular, and aggressive. So you find that type of profession, it leans towards a lot of animal protein, physically active in an aggressive profession, like being in the military. And then a person who's more meditative, peaceful, they don't, they tend to incline more towards the animal protein. So just your profession is, and your state of mind are factors. If you do just want to go meditate in the mountains about life, then you're probably will be better off living off of animal protein. If you're going to go join the military and doing hand-to-hand combat, you probably better start eating some meat and lifting some weights. So the other factor besides your profession and the climate, colder climate too, it makes you eat more. I learned that myself moving from Southern California to Southern Texas. Even though we have nice hot summers here, we have pretty cold winters. And those cold winters is what moved me away from my Southern California plant and dairy diet over to a lot more fish. And now I do eat fish raw. Not raw, wild. Salmon is now my favorite. And particularly in the winter, I just feel that I need that extra animal protein to keep my body warm and bulked up to get through the cold weather. If I'm out there in freezing weather, tending to my garden or protecting it with a plastic covering to protect it from the wind or the ice, and taking care of all my animals, making sure their water bowls aren't freezing, and I'm out there in that freezing temperature, even with a jacket on, I feel a lot better after I've had, a nice big piece of salmon. And I'm sure many of my Texas neighbors feel much better after having a whole steak if they have to go out on their ranch in freezing weather. So it's just weather has a factor. Now, if you're in a really hot and warm and cozy climate, and during the summer, you can eat a lot less animal protein. So what's the other factor? Is it digestion? There's certain types of animal protein that are harder to digest, like milk is hard to digest, particularly if it's homogenized and pasteurized. And some Vata type persons have a lot of trouble with milk. A Kapha type person will get a lot of congestion and mucus from milk and yogurt. So it's not advised that they have a milk. For a Vata, they should have just yogurt, cheese, paneer, and a lot of ghee due to their dry nature, because they just don't have the capacity to digest that milk. Yeah, and that's a good question there about seafood. Again, Ayurveda breaks it down quite differently. Vata does better with oily seafood like salmon, and there's very light seafood too, that like shrimp and lobster, which is okay for Kapha. Sometimes some overweight Kapha types who I tell them no more hamburgers, no more chicken sandwiches. They're like, oh God, can I at least have some seafood? And I say, okay, how about shrimp? And they go, oh yeah, okay, I'll eat shrimp. And it's because shrimp is light. It's not heavy. You can eat a whole basket full of shrimp and you're not full. It's not gonna, it is fatty. It's got oil in it, but it's the lightness to it. It's not gonna make you feel heavy or make the person heavy. And then for a Pitta type person, because we have tendency to have more body heat and even high blood pressure, it's recommended that Pitta types don't, like myself, don't do salty fish, but do freshwater fish. So I do love trout, sweet fish, not salty fish. Well, Vata types, it's recommended they do salty seafood. For Pitta types, it's recommended we do freshwater fish, like freshwater bass, trout, and river fish. And I do love those. So Ayurveda is very distinctive. And then, of course, for Kapha, you just get some shrimp and lobster, maybe some little tilapia every once in a while. But mostly the Kapha, as you know, if you're my patient and you were obese, I put you on pretty much a bean diet as your source of protein. Other sources of protein, of course, nuts, which I mentioned, which really you should never snack on. Sometimes vegetarians and vegans, they try to overeat the nuts thinking that's a good source of protein. I would never think of it as a good source of protein. Maybe a third level of protein. You're either going to do the fish, the chicken, and the meat, or the legumes. I'd recommend both sides do dairy, just different types of dairy based on the individual. I would not recommend anybody completely be meat and dairy free, because it's just not sustainable. This is one reason why the Indians do appreciate, and some would say even worship cows, is because cow is giving them the milk and the cheese and the paneer and the yogurt, their secondary source of protein, particularly helpful for a child. I would never raise a child only on beans without all of that animal protein. If you were going to raise a child vegetarian, you're going to give them beans 3 times a day, like they do in, say, South America. Then you're going to give them a lot of cheese and a lot of milk with it. So that's why a boy who's vegetarian, he'll like the bean and cheese burrito. He doesn't want just the bean and vegetable burrito. He wants the bean and the cheese. And if you are a growing child, you're going to love cheese on everything. Don't count on nuts because you can't snack on them. You can't eat too much. You just mix them with the meal. And milk is a very good secondary source of protein. And it's got, of course, all the vitamin D. But my real favorite is eggs. And even during my vegetarian decades, I was doing my dairy and eggs. And of course, having chickens, I still have eggs. So even when I'm not having fish, sometimes I often have eggs for breakfast. So I'm often getting a good protein right there in the morning for breakfast, because I'm not like a bean guy in the morning. And you definitely don't want to be just eating a bunch of grains in the morning without protein. So, eggs, nice choice. Got all your protein, your fat, your vitamin D. This is, and kids, of course, growing children just love to have eggs. And, egg on bread, egg on toast, egg omelet. Eggs are a really good source of protein. So I think, again, it's good to look and make sure you're not having a deficiency, and don't be too radical. I see we are all too radical. Even people who try to, who need to not have animal protein much, there's no need to be radical. I mean, you can still, have a little fish sometimes, or don't be too radical and leave out something like an egg as a nice secondary source of protein besides your beans. But of course, high protein breakfast would be beans with an egg on top. Huevos rancheros. I mean, that'll fill you up. That's like a steak. And so if you're going to be vegetarian, have the beans, have the eggs, particularly if you're vata or thin or a child or growing. Don't come to conclusions like, oh, this is good, this is bad. People come to this conclusion all the time. Oh, dairy's bad, Well, yogurt at night can be very congestive, and milk can be hard to digest, but we can't, and butter can be somewhat fattening, but there's ghee, which is less fattening than butter and easier to digest. So we should never really lump all this together, and we should never say it's only one way. Everybody's different. And, in my practice, I get vegans who I say, oh, God, you got to have some meat, particularly a menstruating young lady. We get the women whose menstruation stops because they've been living off of smoothies and coffee, and now, of course, mushrooms, and still probably some manuka honey in there, and goji berries as well. But mostly it's a smoothie life, and without any dairy, vegan a smoothie life with a lot of supplements, who still end up having anemia from their bleeding, constant hunger, hair loss, and receding gums. At that point, I encourage these young women to start having animal protein. In fact, I've had some vegan who I encouraged to do ghee. I said, at least do ghee. So I finally talked a diehard vegan into having ghee. And then she came and saw me, and she called me. She said, now I'm a geegan, because she fell in love with the ghee. Sometimes it's just a mind block, because dairy's bad. They get that stuck in their head, and then once they start having the ghee and just kind of let go of their thoughts. Sometimes I have to tell people, just let go of your thoughts. Do you feel like having a piece of salmon? I asked that to a vata type. Oh yeah, I love salmon. But earlier they just told me they're vegetarian. So I have to tell them, just don't think, just tell me, how do you feel? I mean, do you feel like you had eggs as a kid? Do you like eggs? If you were my guest, and if I said, just don't worry about it. What do you feel like having some eggs? And you would, if you just go by the feeling, you may say, yes, I do feel like it, but I thought it's bad. So sometimes people cut themselves off when I tell them, oh, do you feel like having some salmon? And they go, yeah, but I thought it's bad. That's what they're thinking. So you've got to get away from this adolescent mentality of everything viewed in terms of good or bad. Back to what I said in the very beginning, it all depends on these factors: your body type as per Ayurveda, your weight, your age, the climate, your digestive capacity, and your state of, and whether you're male or female, or whether, if you're female, whether you're menstruating or not menstruating, whether you're pregnant or not pregnant. These are all factors. I've known women who were vegetarian, and once they were pregnant, they just couldn't keep it going and just suddenly started wanting to eat hamburgers every day because they were craving it so much. And then, of course, on the other side, we have overweight people who have been eating a lot of meat and bacon and hamburgers and steak their whole life. And then you say, now, when you go to a Mexican restaurant, you just get the beans and no meat. How do you feel? Oh, yeah, I feel better. It's lighter. I don't feel so tired like I have to take a nap. So, but sometimes they're just culturally just used to eating meat, and can't think in terms of having anything but meat. But once they start doing the beans, they say, yeah, I feel lighter. I have more energy. I don't feel sleepy after the meals. And even these people can say, but I thought we needed more meat, or I thought we needed more protein. It's those thoughts that get you in trouble. And those thoughts are just coming from, online reading, where you get some fixed view in your head, because most people do speak in terms of it's good, it's bad, or people online are just giving you their opinion, or they're telling you what worked for them, but that doesn't mean it will work for you. So, if you're very overweight, and many of the people that advocated the vegan diet had very high weights, or obese, ate very bad for a long time, and so they wanted to go the other direction and cleanse and detox and lose weight. And yeah, that diet of no animal protein is very effective. But again, like I said, I wouldn't do it forever. Once you lost those 50 pounds, if you keep going, your bones are just going to get weak. Your hair is going to fall out and just going to get weaker. Now, I have seen people come to me who say, oh, I lost 60 pounds on a vegan diet, but now they're coming to me and their hair's already falling out. And they are, they slipped and fell and broke a bone, and they're getting weak, but because they kind of over depleted themselves. They didn't know when to stop. I mean, it was probably good for 6 months, but they kept going for a couple years thinking it's a cure-all, and then they created a new wave of health problems. So it's never good to be extreme in any place. You may like me, where I'm pretty much vegetarian in the summer. I eat a little more animal protein when it's freezing outside, and of course, another factor I forgot to mention, for fertility, a lot of times a woman needs to have more protein. And even for a man, for libido, does much better on a higher protein diet and animal protein as well. We've seen some men who complain about low sexual stamina, and we get them off of their smoothies and coffee and chocolate and mushrooms and start giving them some fish and other things. And we can even see, the libido's increasing, sexual stamina's increasing, body mass is increasing, and probably testosterone is increasing too. So, it all depends. Maybe you're an old man and you're not sexually active anymore. Then you're not living in hot weather or cold weather. It's different than a young man who's physically active, sexually active, living in freezing temperature. He's going to be more inclined to eating more animal protein. So I hope that got you out of the fixed thinking what meat's good or chicken's good or fish good. Of course, we always need good quality animal protein. I mean, if you're going to have fish, it always should be wild, never farm raised, where they're, indigesting their own waste and living off of chemical feed or chemical based food. And you should never have chicken that's not hormone free, because that's creating, all types of, hormonal imbalances, men with getting breasts from eating chicken with hormones, and women getting fibroids and other high estrogen conditions from all this chicken and beef shot up with hormones. So you should always go hormone-free chicken, grass-fed beef. You got to go for quality at all times, no matter what's, and raw milk, it's not, you don't want quantity, you want quality. And then you need to go look at your own circumstances, your energy level, your weight, your age, whether you're sexually active or childbearing years, and your digestive capacity. But looking at all these factors, then you'll know, if you listen to your body, not the internet, what you should be eating. If you really listen to your body's telling you. If you can't listen to your body enough, then you can just do an appointment with an Ayurvedic doctor or myself, and we can tell you very quickly, because this is what we're doing for all patients, for all conditions, quickly diagnosing their body type, and we could say their nutritional needs very fast, no matter what condition you have. So I hope that helped you folks to understand the truth on that subject. There's no right or no wrong. We're all different, and it really depends on the circumstances and the individual. Thank you very much.